with Tribune reporters Rich Campbell.
I normally don't get frizzled, but I was frizzled that day when I left.
And Dan Wiederer.
The reason you're here and the reason we're so excited to talk to you is because of the kind of person that you are.
At ChicagoTribune.com.
That got me shaking a little bit, just thinking about it.
Hey folks, welcome to Bear Download, the Chicago Tribune's Bears podcast. I'm Rich Campbell, here with Dan Wiederer. It's Thursday. The Bears are getting ready for Week 2 against the Broncos on the road, 3:25 Chicago time Sunday. Dan, how you doing?
We're getting to go on the road together for the first time in a long time. A little flight out to Denver. Should be a fun weekend. I think everyone is looking forward to this trip. The Bears have had way too long to sit on that 10-3 loss to the Packers in the season opener, and it's about time that they get back on the field and get a chance to take out some of that frustrated energy.
When you go to a city like Denver, you
Sunshine State.
Yeah, the Sunshine State. You arrange things on the home front, so you just get to go a couple hours earlier on a Saturday to really enjoy the city. That's the plan. Hopefully a really good time there. How many times have you been to Denver?
Yeah, I really haven't spent a lot of time there at all. I was there in 2015 for a work trip, if you recall, going out there to catch up with the Broncos when John Fox was new
that
in
big
town
glowing
here in
feature you
Chicago.
wrote about.
Yeah, and that was at a point where it looked like the Bears were putting the pieces together of something here.
Yeah.
4 years later, a totally different story. So I have not spent a whole lot of time in the city and eager to see what it has to offer.
Yeah, the joint practices out there last year allowed me to unpack the suitcase, and one of those bigger ones you had to check and explore Denver a little bit. So it should be a fun trip. And as you said, man, the vultures have been circling for so long, three extra days because of that Thursday night game that really for everyone in House Hall, kickoff can't come soon enough. And we'll get to all of that in the podcast. So much to break down as the team had a chance to really digest the 10-3 loss to the Packers, figure out why things broke down so badly offensively and in so many ways on that side of the ball, and move forward to this really intriguing matchup as the offense has so much to prove and so much water to bail from their boat. They're going up against Vic Fangio, who knows the Bears' secrets. He knows their personnel. He knows Mitch Trubisky. And so there's a ton to get at about this matchup as we preview it. We'll get to That's Just Stupid and Crown 'em as well. Get to your three keys, Dan, and our score predictions. So let's get right to it, shall we?
Absolutely.
Okay. I want to start the podcast by going straight to the head coach here. Let's unpack some of Nagy's postmortem from the Packers game and make sure we're speaking in the context of what needs to improve going forward, okay? Let's start with the play calling, because the day after the game, on Friday when we met with him at Hallis Hall, and again on Monday, Nagy was self-critical, saying that he recognized an imbalance. He recognized that they needed to run the ball more. The Bears had 65 plays. 53 of them were either passes, dropbacks, or pass options. A huge imbalance. And Nagy, I think there was a moment of revelation after the fact that got away from him just in terms of the play-to-play selection. And for me, getting the offense going and getting Trubisky going begins with Nagy setting him up for success against the Broncos.
Oh, there's no question about it, and we'll get into this a little bit more in the game-specific talk in the Three Keys segment, but it was very jarring, I think, for people to realize how poorly that game went a week ago, and the lack of balance on offense was a major part of this, because this wasn't a chase game. You and I talked about it leaving Soldier Field. At no point were the Bears down by multiple scores, and so you didn't have to be so pass-reliant and crazy about making those things happen, right? You were right there the whole way, and you've got running backs that you went out and hand chose yourself in David Montgomery and Mike Davis and Tariq Cohen, and you just didn't get them involved enough in the running game to establish any sort of balance, and it was a problem. And it wasn't just that for Matt Nagy. I think we can also get into the decision to go for it on 4th and 10 in the third quarter of a 7-3 game rather than letting your kicker try a 51-yard field goal. That's a discussion that needs to be had as well. And so I think there were plenty of questions that reminded us that even though Matt Nagy is the reigning coach of the year in the NFL, he is still relatively inexperienced as a play caller. He is still relatively inexperienced as an overseer of this entire operation. And there are going to be growing pains for him, just as there are for his quarterback, just as there are for so many other young players. And folks have to be ready for the idea that Matt Nagy is not a finished product and he's not a flawless coach by any means.
Yeah, it's now 9 of 18 games under Matt Nagy as the play caller and head coach for the Bears that the offense has failed to score 20 or more points. That's a pretty big sample size. And Nagy, I don't know if I would call it a stubbornness. Certainly he likes to operate with conviction, so maybe it comes off as a stubbornness. But there are a couple things at play here. I truly feel like Nagy and his explanations to us could not put a finger on why the game got away from him. He struggled, I felt like, to articulate this. Do you agree that, he sensed that there was no rhythm, he sensed that it got away from him, and he just kept saying things like, I've never been part of a game like this, or it's so hard to explain. But from our reporting, even from talking to offensive line coach Harry Hiestand on Tuesday, running was an important element and a heavy element in that game plan. And for some reason, they got away from it. Nagy last season on 1st and 10, in terms of calling runs versus passes. So 1st and 10, you feel like it's the down and distance leaves it open for you both ways. Okay. The Bears ran the ball 9th most frequently of any team in the league. That's top 3rd. It's not like Nagy is this quarterback, former quarterback himself. He's got it in his DNA to throw it, and all he wants to do is sling it. I think he appreciates balance to the offense. And if you sit him down, of course he knows how a running game helps his quarterback, which is why I just have such a hard time, and I think Nagy did too, of explaining the disconnect of what we saw in this game. And yeah, he's got to rely on David Montgomery a little bit, try to help his offensive line, particularly against Von Miller and Bradley Chubb, who are the best players the Broncos have. It goes back to this point of play to the strength of your roster. We talked about this in the post-game podcast about, John Fox's painful ball control approach. Well, not that extreme, but understand that you run the ball, you control the ball, you play good defense, and you let Mitch make a few plays here and there. Don't give him a chance to make mistakes, and you're probably going to win the game because your defense is that good.
Yeah, as we record this, it's 4 o'clock on a Thursday night. We're not even a full week from when that game kicked off last week, and I think it was jarring in the last 6+ days to feel how much the outside perception of who this team was and what they are trying to accomplish shifted and veered, and part of it being that the head coach and the quarterback had really pronounced struggles and rough games in week 1. And I've classified this as a worst-case scenario loss for the Bears last week. Because
other than getting Khalil Mack injured, I know what you're saying when you said that. I've heard you say that already this week.
The defense was special. The quarterback was not good. The fans became so ornery and disgruntled that they were booing for chunks of the second half. You had the extra long layoff, as you mentioned, the 10 days to sort of sit on this thing and let it fester and stew, and there wasn't that quick page flip to the next opponent in the next week, and so this thing kind of took on a life of its own. And for the Bears, and for Matt Nagy in particular, it's about, as he said on Friday and again on Monday, it's about digging deep and figuring out the why. Why did the breakdowns occur? Why were the struggles so pronounced? And now go about fixing them. I think that this offense really has a sense that this isn't a major overhaul that needs to occur between weeks 1 and week 2 to get this thing back on track. But there's work to be done, and there's honesty to be had in the building about just how far away from a productive and consistently high-powered attack this is, and they've got to start putting those pieces together, and they've got to do it right away, because this city, I have told you all week, it can't handle 0-2. If 0-1 is any indication, this city cannot handle 0-2.
Well, there's just no more patience. I mean, when the team and its players are openly talking about Super Bowl in the offseason, the patience is gone, right? You need results right away. And so, 0-2 would not be delivering on that. And I think for the Bears, from what we've heard at House Hall this week, a lot of it starts with focus. And that can be a bit of an unsatisfying explanation because it's a bit abstract, but we heard this from multiple coaches. Offensive coordinator Mark Helfrich, offensive line coach Harry Hiestand, that said when the results started to pile up negatively for the Bears in the Packers game, that guys didn't know how to work through it and get their way out of it, that the focus on fundamentals in the process of every play was outweighed by a sense of distress about just the results themselves. And as Hiestand explained this, particularly for the offensive line, which I think is so important, obviously, for Mitch. We know Mitch is so much better when he's got a clean pocket and has time to see the field, as every quarterback is. But Mitch, it seems like, at this stage of his career, really needs that clean pocket and the time to be comfortable. That is such an important element. That they need a fast start on Sunday so that they have some confidence and momentum and are able to maintain the focus. And if it doesn't go well, boy, we'll see how good they are at taking the lessons from this Packers game, maintaining focus and righting the ship.
Well, you mentioned Mark Helfrich's comments in the wake of what Harry Hiestand told you the other day about the offensive line sort of getting so flustered by the lack of consistent productivity that they lost focus on each play, right? They weren't dialed in on, okay, this is what we need to do on this particular down to create success. It was, how are we going to start to get this thing moving? You know, they were thinking about touchdowns before they were thinking about getting 3 or 4 yards, right? And Mark Helfrich kind of doubled down on that on Thursday afternoon here at Hallis Hall and said it's about emotionally moving on, were his words, and that the team did not do a good job in what was a one-score game for the entire game, right? The absolute entire game, it was a one-score game, and they didn't emotionally move on. And Helfrich said, you talk about it, and now your leaders have to step up and move on, and really, they just got to handle it better. Helfrich's own words were, the next play is the most important play in the history of football. Whether you're up 14-0 or down 10-3 and struggling to get anything going, you have to be able to turn that page and be focused in on that next given moment. And so that's a challenge. And to circle it back to your point on the opening of this conversation, that's a challenge that the head coach, as the overseer of this football team, as sort of the emotional compass of this group, has to be responsible for, and has to have people in charge that can help him with that, so that this doesn't become a recurring issue for the rest of the year.
I want to get into the matchup between Matt Nagy and Vic Fangio in a minute, but let's go to the game management point that you mentioned a few minutes ago, Dan. Specifically about that 4th and 10 situation. As we dug in with Matt Nagy the following day, you began a line of questioning, just really trying to understand the process the Bears go through of establishing this number for Eddie Pinheiro, the range in front of which they'll allow him to kick a field goal and beyond which they'll do something else. And I just was left unsatisfied by Nagy's explanation of this on Friday. And even as we've gone through this week and tried to pin it down more, at first, I guess it was in the Colts preseason game, Nagy portrayed this as a matter of distance and distance alone. And as we've come to realize since the preseason ended and even through this first game, that there are a lot of factors that go into this. There is game situation, score, how the defense is playing, etc., that it really isn't this objective number, what does he hit in pregame? There's a lot that goes into it. And so now you are asking Nagy to apply risk assessment and getting a measure of his confidence in his defense, his offense, his kicker. Yeah. I just don't think this added up the right way for the Bears the other night. When Nagy ends up explaining that his decision to go for it on 4th and 10, down 7-3 from the 33-yard line, is about field position.
Right.
Trubisky scrambles.
30.
Yeah, Trubisky scrambles for 8 yards, I believe it was.
No, it was 3. It was
3 yards? Okay, so you're the distance on the field that you gained, or the swing, is 11 yards.
Yeah.
11 yards. That's with as lights out as your defense was playing, you want to take an 11 yards over the chance to make it a 1-point game? That just makes no sense. So,
or even punt it inside the 5.
Well, so
right?
if you punt, then it's a different. If you punt, then it's a different calculation. Okay, so
Sure.
if he had punted, I think you back off this a little bit and say, okay, look, he didn't want to hit from 51, but he wanted to pin him back, see what the defense could do. I'd buy that way more than it's a field position game and it's an 11-yard swing there. No way. It's a matter of confidence in Pinheiro, which the Bears are really trying to manage. And I know you had a chance to talk to special teams coordinator Chris Tabor this week about finding that number and how the confidence on the kicker factors into it. I'm curious to hear more about that conversation because I think it's really important for us to keep in our minds, not only as Pinheiro goes into the second game, but goes into Denver where the ball really flies well.
So there's a lot here for me, and so before we zoom out and look at some of the details of determining the number, let's cut to the chase of what you just mentioned, Matt Nagy's confidence in Eddie Pinheiro. This isn't about Matt Nagy's confidence in Eddie Pinheiro. It's Matt Nagy's confidence in any kicker of any kind trying to help him win a football game, right? He could have had Adam Vinatieri and Morton Anderson on the sideline last week, and I think he still might have opted to go for it on 4th and 10 because he is still spooked by the Cody Parkey miss in the playoff game. And being in Soldier Field and understanding that a missed kick was going to affect the entire vibe of the stadium was something that there is no question in my mind factored in to Nagy's decision there. This wasn't about Eddie Pinheiro. This was about last January starting out.
The counter is, didn't the terrible play on 4th and 10 also do the same thing?
Right. And right, there's no question about that. There's no question about that. And that's a big deal because this wasn't 4th and 1. This wasn't 4th and 2. This was 4th and 10 for an offense that wasn't doing anything right the entire night. And so to have confidence that you were going to convert that somehow was a little bit
It was totally misguided. There was nothing to base that on. It was baseless. Yeah.
It was off. And so, again, this is a situation where Eddie Pinheiro, God bless him, has walked into a situation where he is being asked to make up for the sins of others, right? And he's in a situation that has nothing to do with him and yet has everything to do with him going forward, right? And so it's a difficult situation, and they have to figure out when they're going to trust him, how they're going to trust him, what his strength is. To get into the actual discussion.
Let me just stop you right there for 1 second, because that runs counter to what Nagy said after naming Pinheiro the kicker about we have confidence in him, and he needs to understand that if he misses a kick, he's got a leash, and we want to see how he bounces back. That's the problem I have with this, is that Nagy is not practicing what he preached right there. And so you have some mixed messages, and it truly gets to the insecurity of the entire issue.
And it's there, right? I mean, I think we can acknowledge that it's there. You know, when you're looking at this particular situation, it's a 7-3 game. And while Matt framed this after the game on Thursday night and again the next day as okay, we've got a number and we've got to stick strictly to our number, he has since sort of given us the idea that, well, wait a second, time and score factors into this. Coaches, 51% factors into this a little bit. He's got the ability to move that number if so desired based on how he feels the game is going, based on the situation. Yes, there's a number, but if he wants to defy that number, it's definitely within his rights to do so as the coach.
You know what this reminds me of? This is kind of an obscure reference here, but remember when we were at Bourbonnais and we went to the Olive Garden and they give you the bill on that little handheld tablet,
and you broke the receipt thing.
Yeah, and I did break the receipt thing. The tip, you scroll the tip on that. It's electronic, and then there's that number right there. Yeah, nope. They're a little late with the waters there. I had to ask twice for more salad. Let's scoot it down there. It's kind of what Nagy's doing there.
Can I get a box for these damn breadsticks already? But to give you a little bit more insight into the process that goes on in pregame to determining this number, Chris Tabor was kind enough to visit with me on Thursday afternoon and talk about it a little bit. And he says, obviously, number one, you go out and you watch Eddie kick, and you're judging accuracy. You're judging ball flight. You're judging his consistency. You're taking notes on the strength of the wind, the direction of the wind. You're taking all these things into account as you figure this thing out. And he says it's not just about making kicks, right? That the ugly makes are noted as well. That one didn't go through the way we would like to see it go through. So that factors into this conversation. And so you're trying to figure out kicking both directions. In Soldier Field, for example, it's north and south. What's the range for the night? And there are different qualities. He wouldn't go into the exacts out of competitive advantage fears of how it's different kicking south at Soldier Field versus kicking north. But I've talked to others who have said that the wind patterns are distinctly different, and you have to have experience there to understand that a little bit. And so there are differences that go into it. Now you're watching Eddie kick through the pregame, and you're trying to gauge, which way are his kicks going from 50, from 55, from 53, and ultimately you get to the end of that, and Chris Tabor talks to Eddie Pinheiro, asks him a little bit about his feelings from pregame, and they settle on a line, right? This is the yard line we need to get to to absolutely greenlight a kick. Well,
and he apparently wasn't on the same page with that line last week, as we learned from Brad Biggs' interview with him.
And Biggsy, I think, said, and we mentioned this, I think, the last podcast, that he said he thought 55 or 58 yards he could go that direction. They decided it was less. But Nagy also told us that had the kick been from 46 yards before that costly delay of game penalty a couple plays earlier, that he would have absolutely kicked the field goal and taken the 7-6 score over the chance to score a touchdown. And so all these things sort of blend together and lead you to believe that, number one, you and I got to get to the press box early every single game from here on out to make sure we're dialed in on what Eddie Piñeiro's doing pregame and see if we can figure out what his number is. And number two,
you're not going to beat Biggsy there. I guarantee you.
This is going to be a fluid process for the team the whole year, right? And obviously it's going to be different this week in Denver. The altitude will allow those kicks to fly a lot further, to give Eddie Piñeiro more range. And we'll have to see what that number is Sunday in Denver. And
I'll be disappointed if in pregame he is not attempting field goals from his own half the field. Just to see if he can hit from 65.
There's no question he'll be doing that, and so they'll have to figure this out. The next time they get back to Soldier Field at the end of the month, we'll have to keep an eye on that, because you and I know that September 5th and the middle of December are two different animals with this, and so I think that was one of the things that gave people pause, that you have this kicker who has a notably strong leg that is his number one strength, right, and they didn't rely on him to try the 51-yard field goal in a game that they could have used points in to steady the tide. And so that's the question, right? You have the wrong guy if you can't trust him to try from 51 in a game like that. Chris Tabor said today, not worried about his leg strength. In practice this week, he's had a tremendous week of practice with the distance he's been hitting from. There's no concern about that. They just have to stick to the number. And one other thing that I found interesting is Chris Tabor said that in talking to other special teams coaches around the league who have had young kickers, they have all stressed that being disciplined with that number is a big help, which leads you to believe that look, you're also managing a young kicker's confidence here as well, right? You want him to have as many makeable kicks go through the uprights as possible before you start extending things, right, and then pushing things back and taking the risks. And so this is a process. We knew it was going to be an issue for the Bears all season long, and now it's up to them to figure out how smoothly they can navigate it.
Yeah, I would still say that they got the risk assessment wrong on this, given what we know about Piñeiro's leg strength and accuracy, and given the situation in that game, the way the offense was struggling, the fact that they were in scoring range, the fact that they could have cut it to a field goal game. And all right, they ended up losing, and Nagy has questions to answer. So as we look then about Nagy's need to bounce back, there are a couple elements here. As the head coach, he's got to keep them focused. He's got to keep the mental state of this team in the right place. From an offensive standpoint, as a game planner, I think there's a lot more balance to be achieved offensively. And then as a play caller, now you really get into some interesting parts of the chess match with Vic Fangio. And for Nagy to face this pressure and the intensity of expectations this week, and to happen to be going against a coordinator who led the Bears turnaround defensively, whose strategy and philosophies are still part of the Bears fabric, who has seen this quarterback practice every day for the last 2 years, up until, of course, this season when Vic became the coach of the Broncos. This is a taller mountain than it would normally be. You're going to see a lot of zone from Vic. Vic is going to mix it up. He's going to know what rattles Mitch. And now it's really going to test Matt's expertise offensively in a way that, boy, given everything else, it's unfortunate timing for him. But I think Matt would tell you it's an opportunity to prove himself, and he's going to have to do that.
So I've got a challenge for all our diehard fans amongst our loyal audience here. Spend some time before we get to Sunday and go back through Bears-Rams from December of last year. Take a look at what Vic Fangio and the Bears defense did to a Rams offense that was much more productive and proven and accomplished at that point of the season than this Bears offense is, and understand what's possible when Vic senses a chance to get a young quarterback unsettled and uncertain about himself. And you saw it, right? So there's two reasons to watch this game. Number one is to have an idea that Fangio, if you give him the firepower, let's not downplay the significance of the Bears playmakers in that game and that win. But Vic has an ability to make young quarterbacks really, really uncomfortable. And he has the opportunity to really do that to Mitch on Sunday. The other part of that is that game, and we can get into more of this in a little bit on Mitch, but that game for Mitch Trubisky was awful. He played a terrible game against the Rams, and because the defense was so good and won the game, he was spared the avalanche of criticism and negativity that's come for him this week in this city because the Bears lost to the Packers on that big stage game. And so it's all just a reminder of what's at play here, right? And there's so many factors swirling.
I'm planning on dying tonight. What are your plans?
It was a wide receiver screen, and he came inside, and Jan Johnson came in and ripped the football out. They have not given a signal who has the football yet, but it did come out. Jan Johnson ripped the football out.
And this is going to be really interesting to see if Matt can be successful in this chess match and be able to position his offense for success, be able to take what Vic throws at him and hit it, right? Put it in play and get a couple singles, a couple doubles, and put some runs on the board and then see where it takes him.
When I spoke to Sean McVay, the Rams coach, for the Matt LaFleur feature that ran before the Packers game, we got off topic a little bit and started talking about that game in December. And Sean was so complimentary of Vic and how he was able to rattle Jared Goff. Dan, I want to revisit this point when we get to our score predictions because I have seen your score prediction. Yep. Okay, so I want you to answer for this when we get to it later in the podcast.
Happy to
I think all the listeners will want to stick around for that. All right, Dan, let's get to That's Just Stupid. And we'll go with the listeners to Wednesday's Mitch Trubisky news conference. I'm sure most of you have heard of what Trubisky said by now. I wrote a story about it for ChicagoTribune.com in the context of Mitch's confidence and how he moves on from negative performances, which has been a focal point for Matt Nagy, Mark Helfrich, quarterbacks coach Dave Ragone, the entire time that they've worked with him. And what happened at Mitch's news conference on Wednesday spotlighted this again and really underscored just how important it is that Mitch is able to turn the page on one of the most disappointing performances of his career. We've got the audio for you. Let's play that first, and we'll break it down. Take a listen.
You talked about the 3rd and 1 RPO the other day. Or Matt talked about it. Can you walk us through just kind of everything you're evaluating when you're deciding whether to give it or keep it for a throw?
No, I was told not to talk about the last game. There's a lot of decisions on each play, and there's like 3 or 4 different plays built in one. Sometimes it's the right decision, sometimes it's wrong. Sometimes I make the wrong decision, but I make it right with the way I execute it. But we're moving on to this week, and we just got to be almost automatic in 3rd and 1. We got to just make sure we get those. I was Adam amongst other people that we're moving on.
All right, Dan, you were in the room for that. What did you think when Mitch turned to the spokesman and said, I was told not to talk about the last game?
So in the moment, I felt like it was just a innocent stumble. I felt as if the talking point at House Hall, understandably, was let's get our focus going forward. It's been a full 6 days since we lost to the Packers. No use reliving that nightmare and sitting there and beating that thing to death when we've got a game against the Broncos to prepare for. And so let's try to move our eyes in the positive direction going forward, what we can do this week. Mitch handled it clumsily. It was a sloppily handled moment at the podium. And it's unfortunate for the Bears because, as I mentioned to you, look, this is a big deal, right? This is a team in one of the largest cities in America with legitimate Super Bowl hopes, with a fan base that is starving for success. And oh, by the way, every single press conference that occurs here at Halas Hall is broadcast live as it happens to anyone who has social media or the internet or anything possible. And so when you make these little slip-ups, it opens the door to interpretations of all kinds. And you know what the immediate interpretation was by the outside world, from fans, from people on sports talk radio, from those who heard that and said, oh my God.
Yeah, the Bears are coddling him.
Yes, are they this worried about Mitch Trubisky that they have to sort of give him directions to not talk about his errors and protect him in this way? I don't think it's that. I really don't. But I think there's a separate storyline that we can talk about, which is the whole issue of how do they get their arms around the confidence issues that have been present for Mitch Trubisky since they drafted him, really, in 2017. And how do they get this thing in their control and in Mitch's control in a way that's productive and helps him to move forward so that these things don't become negative weights that weigh the quarterback down and in turn bring the whole team down a level. And so this is a multi-layered discussion, and I think it's important, as you did in your piece today, to acknowledge that the press conference just sort of shined a light on this, but the press conference is not the reason that we are confidently telling our listeners and our audience that there are concerns within the building here at Halas Hall of where Mitch is at psychologically, where he's at in his headspace, and whether he can get this thing back on track as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think you described the press conference well when you say clumsy and a stumble. I don't think that the Bears had a directive out to him not to talk at all about the game, or that they muzzled him, or they thought he was a fragile mess. If
Matt Nagy told you today that it didn't come from him.
It didn't come from him. And that was part of what opened eyes about Mitch's slip up at the podium, was that the directive had come from this team spokesman amongst other people. And it really opened up the interpretation to, is this coming from Matt Nagy? Do they think that he needs to be insulated from this criticism in order to move on, in order to salvage the offense and play well? I mean, you heard Mitch later in the press conference say he had 3 days to dwell on the game, and he knows that's not what you're supposed to do, but that's what he did. He admitted that. I mean, this has been something that the Bears have been focused on, as you mentioned, for a long time. I would just say to the listeners, just listen to what the head coach has said all along. And Dan, now this brings me to this little game I want to play with you, okay?
Okay. All right, because I've got some things I can say to you.
Okay, so here we go. Game. I'm going to read you a quote right here. This is after Mitch threw an interception, and I want you to tell me when this was said, okay, by Matt Nagy, all right? For Mitch, the biggest thing as he grows and learns to play that position is next play mentality. There is nothing you can do about it now, right? You let that sink into your brain too much and you're in trouble for the rest of the game. He'll be fine. The great ones in this league, trust me, they've thrown interceptions before. That's part of the game and a part of life. When did Matt Nagy say that?
I'm going to say, just making an educated guess, after the Packers game in 2018.
Matt Nagy said that on the second day of his new coach minicamp on April 18th, 2018. That was the second practice they ever had together. And Matt is immediately establishing that this is an important element of quarterback success. Okay? I'm going to read you another one. All right?
Listening. Ready to go.
Anytime you throw an interception, it can be hard on you as a quarterback. We're preaching as a staff and together as players of this next play mentality approach. For him, and meaning Mitch, what I thought was growth yesterday was the fact that he didn't let a bad play, for instance, an interception, affect his next play or his next series. That's important. And as long as we continue to see that, he's going to understand he can't be perfect. There's going to be times where there's going to be a mistake or you make a poor throw or poor decision. But as long as we don't repeat that thing, then we're growing. When did Matt Nagy say that?
Week 9 of last year.
That was week 2 of last year after the Seahawks game, which the Bears won on Monday night. They bounced back from that opening game against the Packers. They ended up surviving a little bit of a shaky offensive game early. Prince Amukamara had a pick 6 in that game, and they got out with some momentum. They started generating it. All right. Let me continue on with this, okay?
I've got one for you, too. Okay, go for it.
Are you going to throw it at me now, or do I have to wait for it?
Can I give you one?
Yeah, go ahead. Give me one.
Okay. You're never going to have great practices all the time. If there was a practice that was just okay, when it's kind of choppy, what I'm looking for is how does he handle that situation? Does he mope? Does he put his head down? Or does he freaking get ready for the next play and get ready to roll? That's where we're at right now. Getting close to that point, I don't want to force it to happen. I want it to organically happen.
Well, I know the answer to this because I read your email earlier, but I know it was this summer in training camp.
The second week of training camp, it was after one of those practices where you and I came off the field with that face kind of like, that was not crisp. You know, that was not a smooth practice, and that's what Matt Nagy said there. And I was struck in that moment of him using the word organically. Right? You can't force your hand on a quarterback and say, get over it. The quarterback has to do his own work at getting over it, right? He can't constantly be reminded to get over it. That's what Matt Nagy was saying, and they're still sort of in this process, and this is going to be a process going forward, and it's a struggle a little bit right now, and it's not the kind of struggle you want with a quarterback drafted number 2 overall who's basically taking the steering wheel of your Super Bowl wagon and is driving it for the year, right? And so anyway, if you've got another one, fire it at me, and we'll see how it matches up.
Yeah, here we go. Offensively, you identify the problem, you fix it, and you move on. You don't dwell on it. You guys all know me pretty well. I don't deal with that well. Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and be negative. I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm going to use it.
I know that was last weekend.
That's Monday. That was
Friday.
Monday.
I was going to say Friday or Monday.
That was Monday. Yeah. So that is what Matt Nagy is saying immediately after the Packers game, and they are moving on to Denver. They are trying to get recalibrated there. And then 2 days later, you hear Mitch use the exact verb, dwell. I had 3 days to dwell on it. And Matt Nagy going, I don't deal with this well. So what you have here, just listen to the head coach. Just listen to what he's saying. This is not being made up. This is not speculation. The head coach is telling all of us that he does not operate this way. He is not wired this way. And it has been a constant effort to get Trubisky wired the same way. And it's not there yet. It's not a finished product. Now, maybe Mitch continues to grow through this. And I think Sunday against the Broncos, we're going to have a great sense of how he is able to turn the page. That's one of the reasons why this game is so intriguing. But the point is here we are through 28 starts, including the playoff game, that this is still a work in progress for them. And at some point, this either has to get better or it's going to be a type of fracture that will have consequences that add up and go beyond what it is just after one individual game or one individual play.
So a couple things. Dave Ragone has been with Mitch Trubisky since the Bears sent that team of folks down Chapel Hill pre-draft process, right? Dave Ragone's been here since the day Mitch was drafted, and he understands his wiring as well as anyone, and he's talked about this with us for 3 years. This is season 3 now of Mitch is making growth in this department, but there's still more room to go in terms of his ability to flush things, to restore his confidence, to not feel the weight of the world on his shoulders when he makes mistakes. Mark Helfrich has told us these things have been recurrent. And so now they're in a little bit of a pickle because I told you back in the spring that this season was going to be so much different because of the level of spotlight, because of the level of expectation, because of everything that hinges on what this season means, not only for this season, but for the long-term future of this organization. Do they have the quarterback position answered, right? And so with that comes a ton of pressure on Mitch Trubisky's shoulders. And you could sense in the opener that he felt it a little bit, right? I think that it is fair to argue that some of those struggles and some of what Mark Helfrich said as an offense wide was the inability to emotionally move on was because they wanted to play so well on that season opening stage and they didn't, and they couldn't pull themselves out of it. And all of a sudden it was like, oh man, this is really frustrating. So how do they manage this going forward? I think of that. You ever see the movie Anger Management with Jack Nicholson and Adam Sandler?
No, I haven't.
So this is an easy clip to look up on YouTube for those who haven't seen it. But there's a scene where they're on the plane, and Adam Sandler's sitting next to Jack Nicholson, and all he wants is a pair of headphones so he can watch the in-flight movie. And he keeps asking calmly, can I get a pair of headphones? And he's not getting them, and so then he has to keep demanding. And eventually the flight attendant and then another flight attendant and then an onboard air marshal keeps telling Adam Sandler, who's very calm, you just need to calm down. Calm down, sir. You just need to calm down. And the more they keep telling him to calm down, the more enraged he becomes, to the point where they have to tase him and drag him off the airplane, right? And so now it's a situation where if you're constantly on top of Mitch on, you need to be more confident. You need to relax. You need to move on. You need to relax. You need to move on. All of a sudden, those types of messaging and reinforcement and things that come from a positive place and a place of good faith end up becoming more pressure filled and adding to the stress and the tension and the anxiety. And so they have quite a challenge on their hands with this month of September to get this thing on track and make sure that they can, get to the bye week in good shape, and also just get themselves in a place where they're not worrying about this every single week before every big game that this team is going to play. Because when you're trying to win a Super Bowl, every game you play is a big, big game.
So it's not just moving on to the next game. It's not just flipping the page. It's fixing everything that was wrong. And that was one of the layers of context that was important, aside from what happened at the news conference on Wednesday. And the problems offensively, they were a collective failure, from the play caller to the offensive line. I mean, the line did not do a good enough job finishing blocks, helping Trubisky scan the field and deliver the ball without being hit. I mean, he had a bunch of incompletions that occurred when he was hit. But as far as Trubisky's responsibilities in that go, there were open receivers that he didn't recognize. And this is what I think is extremely troubling in the context of his experience in Matt Nagy's scheme and what he has been touted as being able to do now. Identify the defense, understand the coverage, and therefore understand where to go with the ball. It didn't happen like that in the Packers game. And as we talked to Nagy about the process of fixing it, Nagy explained Mitch needs to know where to go with the ball on every play, depending on what coverage is played against that play. So
where are the bones buried, right?
Right, that's what we said. Where are the bones buried? Let's say the Bears have one play called, and there's a different option that stands out as your best target against man-to-man, against cover 2, against cover 1. All these different coverages, he's got decisions to make within the play. He's got options within the play, and he's got to know all of that. And it did not flow. It didn't flow well against the Packers. And that's where, to me, I question, can he just make it work against Vic Fangio's zones and disguised coverages on Sunday? I have my doubts. We'll see it. If Mitch plays a great game, it'll be a huge statement in the affirmative of him being able to turn the page. But Dan, kind of a subset of this conversation was the usage of Anthony Miller in the game against the Packers. And I know you had a chance to talk to Anthony Miller and receivers coach Mike Furrey about this. Miller didn't really have an impact on the game, and that was a storyline leading up to the Packers game because he had been hurt. Turns out, though, Miller was open a few times, and Mitch didn't recognize him. Mitch didn't connect with him, and the offense ends up scoring 3 points. So you look at these types of things and go, whoa, how do you fix it?
Well, yeah, and this is just a small sort of detailed snapshot into what the Bears need to fix. But Anthony Miller was on the sideline for 56 of 71 offensive snaps against the Packers. That's hardly enough for an offense that's struggling to score, for an offense that couldn't get anything going, for an offense that could have used some big play explosion. And so now it's the question of how much of that was Anthony Miller's health. Well, Anthony Miller tells me on Monday, ankle's fine. It's been fine for a while. No problems. Don't worry about my ankle. Now it comes down to, has he been impeded by missing so much practice time? First in the spring as he came back from the offseason shoulder surgery, and then in August and after he sprained his ankle at training camp. And so he hasn't had that time to build the on-field chemistry and timing with Trubisky. He hasn't had a chance to demonstrate to Matt Nagy, to receivers coach Mike Furrey, to Mark Helfrich, that he can consistently be where he's supposed to be, when he's supposed to be there, and be sharp with those details. So now Anthony Miller wants his opportunities, right? And hopefully he'll get more going forward. Mike Furrey said he reviewed the 15 snaps that Miller played against the Packers and was impressed. Kid was in the right place where he was supposed to be. He handled his blocking responsibilities. He was where he was supposed to be. And so you would expect in Denver on Sunday for Anthony Miller to be a bigger part of the game plan. That is a key for this offense because you have all these different possible weapons. And I think that's what really frustrated folks in Chicago was the Bears have 3 talented running backs they can use. They've got a receiving core that's as deep as it's been in recent years. They've got an offensive line that's been playing together for a while. They've got a quarterback who's in year 3. This thing should be moving along, right? The wheels should be turning. There should be a hum to this thing, and there wasn't. And so it really startles people. And so, look, you've got a guy in Anthony Miller, second-year receiver, plenty of talent. We saw him put the ball in the end zone a bunch last year. We know what he's capable of. Now you got to unlock that, and it's up to Miller to unlock that. It's up to the quarterback to unlock that. It's up to the coach to call plays and personnel groupings that allows him to unlock that. And so there's this juggle between all these young parts, right? The young coach, the young quarterback, the young receiver. How do we get these things working in unison as quickly as possible to make sure that we can score 20 points in a game? That's not a tough ask, right?
Well, it's a really encouraging review from Mike Furry about Anthony Miller, who has not earned Furry's praise consistently in those interviews with him about his progress and his attention to detail and his understanding of how his route impacts a play. So to hear Furry speak so highly of Miller's game, especially amid all the doubt about it going in, that's really positive, okay? So then put yourself in Matt Nagy's shoes rewatching that game, seeing Miller on task, on his details, open on plays, seeing your play calls, which you're getting criticized for big time. Your play calls have guys open, and your quarterback's not making those throws. How is it making him feel? You know, this is something Nagy has to work through and maintain that level of positivity that he talks about so much, because for a coach who is trying to draw it up and is going to need to draw it up against Vic Fangio this weekend, boy, if guys are open, his quarterback's got to be that extension of him on the field and capitalize on these opportunities.
So my last little sort of footnote on this is Anthony Miller was targeted one time in that game. It was on the final drive when the Bears were still only down 10-3, right? They still could get a touchdown to tie the game, and Miller seemed to get a step on man coverage against Tremont Williams, was open up the left seam, and Trubisky airmailed him by a good 3 yards. And Miller said to me on Monday, it felt open, and when I watched the film, it looked open. And so all of a sudden, you look and you say, okay, was Mitch flustered in the pocket? Nope. Pocket was clean, plenty of time to set and throw, just missed a throw. These are the things that are inexcusable at this stage, right? You cannot have these misfires so consistently when everything is set up for success, and they're going to have to figure this thing out. Again, they're going to a hostile road environment against a coach who can really fluster them, so they better be really dialed in on the details of the game plan and understanding exactly what they do well and what they don't, and making sure that they're in position to succeed.
Mitch Trubisky's news conference slip-up, that's just stupid.
Boy, that was a long one, wasn't it?
Longer than usual. Yeah, we get to talk about the last game. We'll take a quick break and be right back.
Bear Download is brought to you by SeatGeek, the smart way to buy tickets. With its deal score technology, SeatGeek is able to rate the best ticket deals at every event. Download the SeatGeek app today and take $20 off your first order of $30 or more by using code BEAR20 at checkout. SeatGeek, life's an event. We have the tickets.
All right, Dan, let's get to your 3 keys to a Bears victory Sunday in Denver.
Okay, so we've hinted at some of these so far. Number 1, feed David Montgomery, then feed him again, all right? A lot of praise heaped on David Montgomery through the spring, through the summer, into training camp about what he can add to this offense. Guy with great contact balance, breaks tackles, can catch balls out of the backfield, should be a dynamic weapon in this offense. Season opener comes, he touches the ball 7 times. 6 carries for 18 yards, 127-yard catch. The lack of a run-pass balance has been well documented and noted, both inside Hallis Hall and outside Hallis Hall, and now it's time to address the correction phase of this. And the correction phase of this is feeding David Montgomery. Here you go, kid. It's your opportunity on Sunday in Denver to touch the ball 15 times. I think that's a realistic bar, and let's see what you do with them. Help this offense get some life, and let's see where you take them. But I think a lot of it has to start there in getting this offense back on the right track.
The Broncos are expected to get back inside linebacker Todd Davis, who's been injured, and that should help their run defense. But as we said, you got to help Trubisky and make sure that those pass rushers are kept honest. I mean, their outside rushers, that combination is as good as any in the NFL, as good as the one the Bears have. So it makes all the sense in the world to get a heavy dose of David Montgomery. And Matt Nagy has out and said it, that Montgomery earned more touches. So I'd be shocked if he didn't follow through on that.
And now he's got to produce with them, right?
Yeah.
Get your touches. Now do something with them. Get near 100 yards of scrimmage. Put the ball in the end zone. Celebrate a win.
Well, some of that's the offensive line, too. The line didn't block well enough for him. And Harry Heastan spoke about that Tuesday, that so did Kyle Long as well, that when they are given the opportunities, they've got to earn Nagy's confidence. Now, Nagy, I think, would be the first to say he got away from it too quickly, and that there were some instances where Nagy should have had confidence inspired in Montgomery in the running game, but the offensive line knows that with Nagy's tendency to want to get away from it, they've got to prove it immediately that they can block and win, get to the second level, create those lanes for Montgomery to do his thing.
All right, number 2, RELAX. Sorry, Aaron Rodgers, we
nice,
are quoting from your book here, but this goes back to what we talked about in the first segment about an offense that didn't handle struggles very well in that season opener against the Packers and started to press a little bit and started to try to make big things happen when they really needed to just focus on the task at hand, the next play, the next down. And so this goes back to Nagy making better in-game decisions, sharper play calls. It goes back to Trubisky loosening up a little bit and just taking each possession for what it is and making sure he can do it. It goes back to the offensive line, as you mentioned, just focusing in. Do what's asked of you on that play. Positive results will follow. You golf, I golf. That's well documented on our podcast. What's the worst thing you can do after you make a triple bogey?
Continue playing. Well, you want to get off the tee on the next hole.
Right. You go up to the next tee, you put the driver in your hand, you squeeze the crap out of it, and you try to drive the green, right?
Yeah.
You're so mad about the triple bogey that you're going to make eagle on the next hole. And the odds are you're going to snap hook it into the woods or hit a dribbler 26 yards in front of the tee. And now
why don't you give my slice its due, okay?
Now you've got a...
cut that thing into the next fairway.
A triple bogey followed by a double bogey if you're not careful. And so this is the message for Mitch Trubisky in the offense. Just get up on the next tee. You can't erase the triple bogey that you made in week 1. Just get up there, take a smooth swing, hit it down the fairway. You've got a winnable game against an opponent that is not as good as you. Go ahead. Just take care of business. Come home with a win. And if the Bears are 1-1 going into a long week against a Redskins team, all of a sudden you've got that steadying factor that gets everybody back on track.
Yeah, for all the questions I still have about Matt Nagy as a game planner, as a play caller, as an offensive strategist, far fewer questions about his leadership ability, his abilities as a motivator, and the way